Different take on scenes because authors never agree. Part 2 of Writing Killer Scenes, Become a Scene Expert in Just One Day. Write Better Now presents The Scene. There are lots of different ways that writers approach scenes. One of the approaches is like Obstfeld's, which we just talked about, right? Writer C.S. Larkin beautifully explains another common way of looking at scenes in a guest post on Jerry Jenkins's blog. Rather than looking at the intent, only at the intent of the scene, Larkin looks at the position of the scene in the overall story. First, scene types vary depending on where each is placed over the span of a novel. Opening scenes should be loaded with character and set up your premise. That's where you want to slip in important bits of backstory. Middle scenes carry complications, twists, and raise the stakes. Climactic scenes should build to a riveting climax, so they might be shorter and packed with action and emotion. She creates this really interesting 8-step approach to scene building, and the first step is a bit of what I talked about before. You think, what is the scene's purpose? Write one sentence, she says, that encapsulates that for each scene. For instance, the scene I'm working on for my new historical Western romance marks the midpoint of my novel. Its purpose is to show my hero Buck losing control and scaring the heroine, Angela. Step 2, figure out the high moment. Like the overall structure of a novel, a scene has a beginning, middle, and end. The big moment or high moment usually comes near the end. 3, remember the conflicts. A scene should always have the internal and external conflicts of the character that's focused on. It should have stakes. And number 4, think about what changes for your character in the scene. This is really the most important advice she has, and she writes, writing instructor James Scott Bell says, every scene should have a death of a dream, of a relationship, or a plan. Literary agent Donald Moss encourages writers to consider how a point of view character feels before a scene starts and how she feels when the scene ends. Your character should be changed by what happens. That change can be subtle or huge. It can involve a change of opinion, or it could be a monumental personality shift. But change must occur. Why? Because for the story to advance, decisions must be made and action instigated. Every event in your novel should impact your characters and foment change, but it should be significant and serve the plot. That's really super important. Number 5, figure out the point of view of the scene and stick to it. If you're writing in the person that's first, then this is usually pretty easy. If you have multiple points of view in third person, the he, she, it, they, it can be a bit harder. But you don't want to jump around from one person's head to another scene. If you do, then you need to start a new scene. She writes, to decide whose POV to choose, ask yourself who has the most to lose or gain in the scene, who will react the strongest emotionally, who will change the most, whose reaction would most impact the plot. 6, cut the crud. If it's boring, cut it. You just gotta be vicious and cut the boring stuff out. 7, first lines and last lines are important. Each scene is an opportunity to hook your reader into reading more. Those last lines are mini internal cliffhangers. Those first lines are the moments where lots of readers decide to read on or to stop. Give them attention, just like you hopefully give attention to the first and last lines of your book. 8, don't forget the sensory stuff. Sometimes we writers focus so much on plot movement and dialogue that we forget to set the scene and tell our readers where our characters are. Instead, those characters float around in space, ungrounded by details or setting. You don't want to overdo it, but you want to make sure that the senses are evoked and that the characters aren't talking heads or floating bodies. Look, it's beautiful, but it's a little weird, huh? You want to explain what's happening if that's your scene. Over on Now Novel, there's another take on what a scene does. It says that the overall point of a scene is to move the story forward. They keep us engaged and asking what happens next. Establish characters' arcs or cause and effect. This links to the first point. For example, a scene might begin with a character missing a train. As a result, the character may be late for a meeting. The reader wonders what impact the small misfortune will have. Then, Reveal consequences of earlier events. A subsequent scene following the mistrain, for example, might show the consequences for the character when they're late for a crucial meeting. Make the story easier to follow. Scenes chunk what could be a narrative mess into digestible units of action and event. They allow us to play with how we release information to the reader. For example, a scene resolving an earlier subplot might only take place much later in a novel. As writers, we can make some plot gratification instant and some delayed. It's a lot to kind of take in, right? Scenes are more than building blocks of story. They're building blocks with specific purposes and impact. To make the best ones, you want to try to make sure that they do at least what Now Novel asks for them to do. Move the plot forward, help move the character's arc and personality forward, show us theme, show us some consequences about what's already happened. And here are some resources.